You're with Fran Kelly, RN Breakfast.
With only a few more sitting days before both houses are dissolved for the election, the race is on to push through another 50 or so bills before Friday's deadline. These include the aged care reforms, the Gonski changes to school funding, and the crackdown on 457 visas, and much else besides. Last night, a bill allowing a referendum on local government recognition in the Constitution passed the Senate. As Leader of the House, Anthony Albanese is the government's chief tactician in Parliament. Minister, welcome back to breakfast.
Good to be with you, Fran.
This local government referendum is also part of your duties. The referendum will go ahead. What's your reaction to this?
Look, it's a very important piece of national housekeeping, Fran. Our Constitution should give proper recognition to our governance structures, and we do have three tiers of government here in Australia. Local government plays an important role in people's lives in terms of providing local community services, as well as, of course, the essentials like keeping up local roads and collecting rubbish. But they do much more these days. They're involved with childcare, they're involved with community facilities, particularly our local sporting fields and swimming pools. And it's important also, so important symbolically, but important that the federal government can continue to provide direct funding for things like the Roads to Recovery program, where we've committed more than $1.75 billion to local roads since I've been a minister. It is important that that funding be put beyond doubt, and it is pleasing that there's been such broad support. Only 10 out of the more than 200 members and senators have opposed this referendum going ahead.
Nevertheless, disunity usually makes for a no vote on a referendum. Malcolm Turnbull has just said at the doors at Parliament that it will be, quote, very difficult for the yes vote to get up, partly because referenda are so difficult to pass in this country, but also because of the forces mobilising against recognition, some of the states and also parts of the coalition. You're spending $10 million on the yes campaign, which will just be a waste of money if it's not going to get there.
Look, I'm pretty confident that it will get there, Fran. This is a very broad-based campaign. Indeed, the campaign director for the yes case was the campaign director for the no case in the Republican referendum in 1999. What we have is very broad support across local government, and each of the 560-plus mayors and shire presidents will be out there campaigning in their local communities. Local government's so important in some of our regional communities, Fran. It can be the major employer and a real way of connecting people up at that local community level. So I think it is very important that this referendum be carried. I've had really constructive engagement with Barnaby Joyce. I've had direct contact with Tony Abbott, as well as, of course, the Labor Party is absolutely united in its support for constitutional recognition. I think with these 17 words, it's a minor change, and we've put in place, Fran, the protections so that it won't alter the power balance between state and local government. Local government will still be responsible to and created by the state government legislation.
Wayne Swan says, let's go to the working of this Parliament now. Wayne Swan says the 43rd Parliament has been one of the most successful in a generation. More than 580 bills are passed. That's the proud boast of the government. Andrew Wilkie says, well, it's only worked thanks to the independents who have made the hung Parliament more effective, quote, with bad proposals stopped, poor legislation improved and new ideas progressed. Do you give the independents, the crossbenchers, the points in this Parliament?
Oh, look, you'd expect the crossbenchers to talk up their role. And
what do you think of their role?
Well, there's no doubt that in terms of, if you go back, Fran, when the Parliament was formed, there was an argument that it had fallen apart. What we had constantly was talk about election dates, how long will the government last? We have lasted the full term. It is, I think, a tribute to the fact that the crossbenchers have been prepared to engage constructively with the government to secure the passage of legislation. It's not just the quantity, Fran, it's the quality of the legislation. If you have a look across the spectrum, the clean energy legislation, the aged care reform, the education bills, Disability Care Australia, superannuation reform. If you look at the area of the environment, the creation of the world's largest marine parks. If you look at my area of transport, major national shipping legislation, national transport regulators that will contribute $30 billion growth to the economy over 20 years, safe rates for truck drivers. These are all important pieces of legislation. What the government has been prepared to do is to work with the parliament that the Australian people gave us and to respect the decision of our democratic processes. The opposition, they've just engaged in trying to tear it down. There's been 80 suspensions of standing orders, disrupting question time, just relentless negativity from the other side. And that's why I think, Fran, in the coming couple of months as we head towards September 14, the contrast between a government that has got things done, that does have a plan for the future, and an opposition that really hasn't done the hard work. Tony Abbott doesn't seem, in my area, to even acknowledge that Infrastructure Australia has been created and has been doing this work. His opposition to any funding of public transport. He's stuck in this just relentless negativity. And that can get you through a campaign if your strategy is to tear the parliament down. What it can't do is put you in a position to present yourself with an alternative vision for the nation.
It's 8 minutes to 8 on Breakfast. We're speaking with Anthony Albanese, the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure and Local Government and Leader of the Government in the House. Anthony Albanese, as you head to an election, though, the polls look terrible for Labor, and some in your party have suggested that the hung parliament is a reason for that. Joel Fitzgibbon said some time ago the hung parliament is killing us. Whenever the parliament's chaotic, the government of the day cops the blame. The voters don't seem to like it much. Whatever the reason, what is the way for Labor to try and close this gap coming to the election, and is the way forward for this leadership to be settled once and for all by the end of the week, as Greg Combate told us yesterday?
Well, look, Fran, I certainly agree that the hung parliament has presented political challenges for the government, and it's presented it because there has been this issue of so-called uncertainty. I've always been confident that the government would last full term. And to give just one example, Fran, when the Prime Minister announced the election date would be on September 14, some of the commentators have continued to argue that that was a mistake. I think that was absolutely the right call, because I tell you what, you've always got to look at the counter proposal. And what would have occurred had the Prime Minister not set that date in January was each and every week there would have been speculation about will they last till the budget, will the budget be carried, what are the consequences behind the budget not being carried, just this constant speculation, because the media in today's 24-hour cycle is so frightened of missing the story that sometimes they get ahead of it, and sometimes they get ahead of a story that doesn't exist.
Well,
and
this story...
The story that hasn't existed in this parliament is that we wouldn't last the full term. It's actually been very secure, this parliament. It has functioned extremely well. We have not lost a single piece of legislation, nor has an amendment been carried to any legislation without the government support.
One story that does exist, and I know you're not keen to talk about it, but everyone else seems to be, which is the Labor leadership. The divisions remain on display. Backbenchers are speaking out, frontbenchers are speaking out. What's the way forward for Labor if Kevin Rudd won't challenge and Cabinet Ministers won't tap Julia Gillard on the shoulder? What should happen? How do you resolve this in the next few days? Oh,
look, I think I'll leave it, Fran, to media people to interview other people from the media about what's going on.
Well, I'm actually asking you, and you're in the caucus room.
About what's going on in the Labor Party. What I do,
Well, I'm
Fran,
asking someone in the Labor Party.
Well, I tell you
Isn't that the best way to do it?
I tell you what I do, Fran. I do my job each and every day. and I leave my internal comments to internal processes. Call me old-fashioned, and I haven't engaged in this sort of speculation. I don't intend to in the future. What I've done is do my job as Leader of the House. One of the examples, Fran, is that the silly thing, I mean, at least you've got it down to 50. There's nowhere near 50 bills yet to pass the Parliament. There's very few bills in the House of Representatives yet to pass, and yet senior journos have written that there are 200 bills because they've added in the 138 bills a couple of weeks ago that are sitting there from private members that have the support of one person, be it Adam Bant from the Greens or a DLP bill or Nick Xenophon.
Well, I
intend just doing my job, continuing to see out this Parliament and then engage in the challenge of continuing to play my role as a minister, but then the election campaign that I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to September, Fran. I've got a referendum campaign to get on the front foot on. I've got an election campaign, and unusually for a South Sydney supporter, I can look forward to actually watching my team run around every weekend.
I do want to come to at least one of the bills that is still on the stack, not yet gone through, but need to ask you this. In your view, will Julia Gillard still be Prime Minister by the end of the week and at the next election?
Yes.
Let's go.
There you go. There's a scoop for you, Fran. What did you think I was going to say? I mean, that's the ridiculous thing about this whole merry-go-round about these issues. And, I today agreed to come on the program on the basis of talking about policy. And if you ask, one of the things that has undermined the government, I guess, it is the fact that it's been very hard for 3 years to have an interview without being asked about some internal issues. And, I think that is one of the things that's made it more difficult. That's not a criticism of any individual or media outlet. I do think, though, that this sort of frantic looking for the story is one of the things that has caused frustration, I think, out there with the public. They're interested in issues rather than personalities.
Let's go to one of the issues now, because the Prime Minister has described suggests the defining moment of this final week of the 43rd Parliament will be the passage of the Gonski Education Funding Bill, or the Education Funding Bill. Where is that at? When will that get passed? Because we're getting to the dying days of this Parliament.
Fran, the Senate have passed a Senate management bill. What that means is that as time runs out for each piece of legislation that is remaining that needs to be carried, the votes are held. So it'll pass this week along with all of the other legislation. The Senate will sit until Friday afternoon around about 3:30. I think the last bills on the list are the appropriation bills, the budget bills. The House of Reps has one major piece of legislation before it, the 457 legislation, which simply it's not like it's a huge change. It's really a practical change, just making sure that people have to advertise for jobs to see if Australians are available prior to that legislation, prior to being able to use the 457.
Anthony Albanese, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Great to talk to you, Fran.
RN, your world unfolding.